All right, ready to explore the Northwest Passage. We're diving deep into this legendary route, separating fact from fiction, seeing how climate change is playing into all of this.
The Northwest Passage, it's more than just a shipping route. It's a story, centuries of myths and ambitions and human drama against a backdrop of ice and unforgiving landscapes.
Wow, a real-life adventure movie. I checked out that Wikipedia article you sent. That icy shortcut through the Canadian Arctic archipelago connecting the Atlantic and Pacific. So captivating. No wonder it's fascinated people for, well, forever.
Absolutely. For centuries, a westward route to Asia, that was the holy grail of exploration, of trade. A shorter route, imagine, rewriting the rules of global commerce.
Everyone wanted that shortcut, the one that could change everything. The article mentions a Strait of Anian. Sounds mythical. What's the story?
That myth, it's all about that shortcut to Asia. Marco Polo's travels, 13th, 14th centuries, got everyone fired up with those stories of the East. Maps evolved, and this mythical strait, a narrow channel slicing North America from Asia, boom, on the map.
People really believed it existed.
Oh, totally. It was a time of discovery and maybe a little wishful thinking, right? Like Juan de Fuca, Greek pilot, sailed for Spain, late 1500s, claimed he sailed it Pacific to the North Sea, there and back.
Hold on, he made that up, or was he like caught up in the moment, you think?
It's a mix, maybe some geography confusion and some good old-fashioned tall tales. But these stories, true or not, they fuel the fire. Exploration fact, fiction, and pure ambition all rolled into one.
And danger. Did these explorers get how dangerous the Arctic could be? The article says there were expeditions going back to the 1500s, like every European power wanted in.
The 16th century, things really heated up. A race, high stakes for bragging rights, and maybe unimaginable riches. The British, the Dutch, everyone wanted to conquer that frozen maze.
What made them risk so much? Ambition. Or maybe scientific curiosity, too.
A bit of both, I think. You've got Martin Frobisher in the 1570s, driven by gold in this passage. He ended up charting a bay, Frobisher Bay, it's named after him, southeast of Baffin Island. He didn't find what he wanted, but he made his mark.
Talk about leaving your mark. But the article mentions some scary stuff about those early trips. Some thought seawater couldn't freeze.
Hard to imagine now, right? But they knew so little about the Arctic Circle, a big unknown.
Yeah.
And that freezing seawater thing, that lasted a while with some really bad results.
Makes you think. What we know now, the basics, were hard won, trial and error, and sadly, tragedy. Like Henry Hudson. 1609, he wanted that shortcut to Asia. He got to present-day New York, even thought the Hudson River was it.
Right. He sailed up the river to what's now Albany, hoping it would lead to the Pacific. A dead end. And his story, it takes a dark turn. 1611, he's exploring what's now Hudson Bay, way up there. His crew mutinied.
And that's where it gets tragic, right?
It is. Hudson, his son, a few loyal crew, set adrift in a small boat in the Arctic, never seen again. The risks they took, the human cost of ambition. And Hudson's story, it's not the only one. The article also talks about Jens Monk, another tragic figure in this quest.
His story's so sad. What happened?
Monk sets off in 1619. His ship got stuck in the ice in Hudson Bay, near the western coast of what we know as Hudson Bay. The Arctic conditions just devastated them. Most of his crew wiped out cold, starvation, scurvy.
Unbearable. I can't imagine.
And he's stuck in the ice all winter. It's amazing he survived. He barely made it back to Norway with just a few of his crew. His story, a stark warning for those who followed. Even with those stories, that dream of the Northwest Passage, it didn't go away. And it's interesting how exploration changed over time.
Like with John Ray, the article talks about how he did things differently, especially compared to those big expeditions the British Navy was doing. What set him apart?
Ray was something else. He worked for the Hudson's Bay Company, spent years in the Arctic, learning how it worked, respecting his power. He knew brute force wasn't the answer up there.
So instead of those huge ships, what did he do?
He went practical, you could say respectful, learned from the Inuit, used dog sleds, relied on their knowledge. He knew that people who'd lived there for centuries, they had the real insights.
He saw the Arctic as a teacher, not something to be conquered.
Exactly. And at work, he mapped huge parts of the coastline. And in 1854, he brought back news about what happened to Sir John Franklin's expedition. A tragic reminder, you can't underestimate the Arctic or ignore indigenous knowledge.
That expedition, it's almost legendary, isn't it? 1845, they set off, so sure they'd conquer the Northwest Passage, and then gone. Like something out of a scary story.
The world was captivated. It took years of searching to figure out what happened. They found notes left by Franklin's crew. Their ships, trapped in the ice near King William Island, that's in the Canadian Archipelago, back in 1846.
Stuck in the ice, winter coming, not knowing if rescue was coming.
Horrible. Franklin died in 47, and his crew tried to escape overland, but none of them made it.
The article mentions lead poisoning, bad canned food, even cannibalism. Just awful how desperate they got.
The brutal reality of it. They were pushed to the limit. It's interesting, even though those discoveries told us a lot, it wasn't until the 1980s that they could really confirm it was the lead poisoning that played such a big part.
Wow, technology solving old mysteries. But it's amazing John Ray had that information from the Inuit back in 1854.
It shows how important it is to listen to indigenous knowledge, to respect it, to use it. But back then, people were skeptical of Ray's findings, especially the cannibalism. It was taboo in Victorian England.
Sometimes the best knowledge comes from where you least expect it. We have to be open to that, to the people who really understand a place. So late 1800s, the Northwest Passage is mapped. The mystery of Franklin, tragic as it was, is solved. But had anyone actually sailed the whole thing?
Not until a Norwegian explorer named Roald Amundsen came along.
Ah, Amundsen, another legend. The article mentions his trip through the Northwest Passage, 1903 to 1906. Did it in a small ship, the Jaya. How did he pull that off?
Amundsen was brilliant. He learned from everyone who came before, especially Franklin. He knew a big ship wouldn't work, so he chose the Jaya, small, sturdy, perfect for those narrow channels full of ice.
Experience, respect for the environment, maybe a little humility too.
Exactly. He kept his crew small, less strain on supplies, more adaptable. Efficiency, working with the Arctic, not against it.
Understanding that the Arctic demands respect. That's a lesson for all of us.
It really is. And even though Amundsen's voyage was a huge achievement, it wasn't the end of the Northwest Passage's story. In the 20th century, there were tons of expeditions pushing the limits, trying new technology, even going back to old ways.
The Northwest Passage became a testing ground, human ingenuity and resilience all in one place. Tell me more about these 20th century explorations.
Well, you've got Knud Rasmussen, Danish Greenlandic explorer. He crossed the Northwest Passage by dog sled 1921 to 1924. He showed that those traditional methods, they still worked, that Inuit knowledge was still relevant.
It's amazing retracing those old routes, the old ways meeting the new. But some were all about those 20th century advancements, right?
Yeah, you've got Henry Larsen, for example, Canadian explorer, sailed the Northwest Passage both directions, starting with the St. Roch.
St. Roch, what was that? Another small ship like Amundsen's?
No, the St. Roch was different. A schooner, yeah, but built tough, you know, reinforced to handle the ice. His voyages, especially that east to west one, 1940 to 42, talk about resilience. They were stuck in the ice some winters, at the mercy of the Arctic.
I can't imagine the mental strength to handle that, like a staring contest with nature.
The power of the Arctic, even with all our technology, in the 20th century, that's when the Northwest Passage, it became more than just exploration. People started seeing dollar signs, those economic opportunities.
Right. 1969, the SS Manhattan, huge oil tanker, tried to make the passage. The goal, oil from Alaska to the rest of the world.
A bold move. Can you imagine? A supertanker in those narrow channels full of ice. Thinking about it now, the environmental risk.
Makes you think, what was more important, money or the environment?
Well, that voyage, it showed everyone how hard it would be, all the logistics, the environmental risks. It led to the Alaska pipeline, which is probably safer, better for the environment in the long run.
The Northwest Passage, always at this crossroads, exploration, the economy, the environment. And then climate change comes along, throws another wrench in the works.
A whole new chapter. And climate change, that's the biggest factor now. The Arctic, it's warming up way too fast. Ice-free summers are becoming normal.
The article said that back in 2007, the European Space Agency, they said the Northwest Passage was fully navigable for the first time ever. That's huge.
It is. But navigable doesn't mean safe. Even with less ice, things can change fast. Ice flows moving. Dangerous for even the most modern ships. There's almost no infrastructure up there.
No handy ports if something goes wrong.
Right, and we can't forget the environment. More ships, more risk of oil spills, damage to the ecosystem. And the Inuit communities who depend on those waters, their way of life, their culture.
It's not just an empty space, it's their home. Their voices need to be heard. Speaking of, there's some debate about who controls this increasingly open route, isn't there?
It's getting tense. Whose waterway is it? Canada, they say it's part of their territory, their internal waters. They want to control who goes in and out, regulate the shipping.
Makes sense. It's within their borders, right? But the U.S. sees it differently.
The U.S. says it's an international strait, open to everyone.
Classic case of different perspectives, big consequences.
Absolutely. And it's caused some problems. Like back in '85, an American icebreaker, the Polar Sea, went through the Northwest Passage. Didn't ask Canada. big international incident.
And in 2005, those U.S. submarines, the nuclear ones, they went through Canadian Arctic waters, no warning. Canada was not happy.
It shows how climate change, it's not just about the environment, it's changing global politics too. The article also talked about this idea of fiber optic cable through the Northwest Passage.
Wow, that would be something. What's the thinking there?
It's ambitious, but it could change everything. Connect London to Tokyo, faster communication, a digital revolution. The world's looking at the Arctic differently now, not just for resources, but for things like this.
So, what have we learned? The Northwest Passage, it started with myths, these daring explorers, some terrible tragedies, and now we're facing all these complicated issues. It's all connected.
It really is, and it shows. What happens in the Arctic affects everyone.
You're right. This deep dive into the Northwest Passage, it's been amazing. History, nature, global politics, all these changes happening because of climate change. And the story's still being written. This is a conversation we need to keep having.
I agree. No easy answers. But the more we know, the better we can handle what's coming, the good and the bad.
Thanks for being here. It's been great. And for everyone listening, check out the article. It's fascinating. Until next time, keep exploring.